afternoon, introduced today by Steve Race.
Good afternoon. Today we welcome to the studio comedy actor Leslie Phillips. I'll be saying hello to him in about 1 minute from now. We have further news also from James McNeish at Godwit Bay, from Evie Garrett visiting Jerusalem, and extracts from your letters on what foreigners think of us, among other subjects like sewing thread, tin openers and performing bears. More of that later. It's impossible, the city of so much hope and so much despair. Evie Garrett describes the old city and meets two of the people who live there.
Brooding over the old city of Jerusalem is Mount Zion, a hill of scrub and stone and derelict buildings. A steep winding road leads up to its holy places, the Franciscan and Dormition churches, the Tomb of David, and the Room of the Last Supper. Just below these shrines, I came on a surprising sight, a stone house in good order with a luxuriant garden, the only private dwelling on Mount Zion. Living here are a remarkable couple, Albert and Pauline Rose. Mr. Rose is a spry 85-year-old. Mrs. Rose is in her 70s, a serenely beautiful woman with a scarcely lined face topped by a crown of silver hair. The Roses have been here since 1964, and until last year, their house was only a few yards on the Israeli side of the Israel-Jordan border. I asked Mrs. Rose why they'd chosen to live in this dangerous spot.
I wanted to come here because I had the vision of Mount Zion and what it means. Mount Zion, we are told, is the place that God chose for his dwelling place, the place where the blessings would go out to all the world, the place where he would have his house of prayer, where all nations would flow into it. So we felt that we would like to have a house on Mount Zion, which would be a place for all people to come. And if God would help us, it would be a place of peace and joy and blessing. When I went to ask the authorities if we could come and live here, they all were aghast and said, of course not, it's impossible. We can't have people living here because it is a holy sanctuary, and we can't have people living here because of the dangers. We wouldn't be responsible for anyone living here. But I believe that what is impossible with man is possible with God. After a long struggle and many difficulties and many refusals, we got permission to live here. And then it was a matter of finding the place where we could live. Finally, I saw this house, which was right on the border and almost out of bounds, and was in a very bad state of ruin because soldiers had been in here fighting in the War of Independence. And then it was left like that for 17 years. But I felt this was the right house, right on the top of Mount Zion, and with a wonderful view facing the Mount of Olives, the Kidron Valley, the Judean hills, and in the distance, the mountains of Moab, and in between was the Dead Sea. One of the great problems was how to get here, because the only way up to Mount Zion was by the steps. And the only other way was a very rough, potholed military track which came up round the mountain and was used only by the soldiers. And this road was barred and locked, and no one was allowed to come on it. So we had another big fight to see if we could get the key of the barrier and be able to use this road. Otherwise, how would we be able to restore this ruined building, bringing up building materials, which would have to be brought up on a donkey's back up the steps. Finally, we won with the military, and they gave us the key on the condition that it never passed out of our hands. When we tried the road, it was such a bad road that our car nearly went to pieces on its first journey. So we thought, well, we'll have to have a jeep, the same way as the soldiers. And just at that time, the Pope decided to come to Israel. So this rough military road was turned into an asphalted road in a few weeks, so that the Pope and his entourage could drive up to the top of Mount Zion. And I was very thankful to the Pope, because he made our coming here so much easier. another thing which was in my vision was a garden. In the Bible it says, "Make the place of my sanctuary beautiful." And I believe that Mount Zion is the place of God's sanctuary. So I thought, if we can start by making a garden in order to beautify one small part of Mount Zion, that might later grow and the whole of Mount Zion would become a garden and beautiful. So we had to start removing lorry loads of rubble, stones and rubbish which had been here for hundreds of years, and replacing that by loads of good soil, by building up the walls, the steps and entrance to the house. After 5 months, we were able to come and live in this house, and we were able to begin that which we hoped would grow here. We gave the house the name Ha-Ohel, which is the tent, the name of Abraham's tent in the wilderness, where all strangers were received with love and a welcome, and we hoped that the blessing that the people had in Abraham's tent would also come upon this house.
Pauline Rose's hopes for Ha-Ohel have been more than fulfilled. Since 1964, people have come to this house from all over the world. People of all creeds and from all walks of life, some to stay, some for a meal, some just passers-by invited in for a cup of tea and a chat. And, as the messages in the 3 big visitors' books show, all have found a welcome and a sense of peace and spiritual renewal in this elegant home with its beautiful garden, where flowering plants grow in amazing profusion and vines climb strongly up the walls, and peach and plum and orange trees are heavy with fruit. But last year, war came to this oasis of peace, and Pauline Rose was in the thick of it.
The soldiers asked us to leave here a few days before, when things looked a little bit serious, but we said we would prefer to stay here. We realized that it was a danger zone and a battle zone, but we had no fears, so we asked if we could remain here. We thought perhaps we may be, in some way, we may be able to be of use. And very reluctantly they agreed, but they would not allow us to stay in this house because it was the most exposed place on Mount Zion. The Jordanian military posts were very near us, facing us and on either side of us. So they insisted that we go into a building at the back of our house, which was a little safer. On the morning of June the 5th, we heard from one of our soldiers that the war had started in Gaza. But we didn't know anything further than that. And as we didn't listen to the radio broadcast that morning, just at the time when all Jerusalemites were asked to go into their shelters and remain there, my husband went into the town in order to attend to some business he had and to get some provisions. And I thought I'd better prepare a few provisions and take them into the building next door in case we would have some trouble here. However, he'd only left about a quarter of an hour when the battle started in full blast. The shells and the bullets, machine guns, all started. And I only had time to run into this building next door. And I was very anxious to know what had happened to my husband. But fortunately, where I was, there was a telephone. So after half an hour, he managed to telephone to say that he was safe in a shelter in the town. But he couldn't come back, of course. So we had this battle. The soldiers were all around us, firing from above us, on each side of us, here on Mount Zion, and the shells and the bullets coming from the other side. The noise was terrible, and really it sounded as though the whole of Mount Zion would be destroyed.
The recording you just heard of the battle noises on Mount Zion was actually made at the time by Mrs. Rose herself, who now continues her story.
This went on for 2 days and 2 nights with hardly a stop. I hadn't had time to take in provisions, and there was no water. But during a little lull in the battle, I went across and got in a little food. I managed to grab a saucepan from the stove with potatoes, which had started cooking on Monday morning, and we managed to finish that off, and we thoroughly enjoyed our meal, as we hadn't had anything to eat for nearly 24 hours. The shelling and the battle continued without a stop until the morning of the 7th of June. And then it died down a little. At the same time, there were many new soldiers coming up to Mount Zion. They were very tired and weary, as they hadn't had anything to drink or perhaps to eat for quite some time. So we managed to make them some coffee before they went in. Before they had finished their coffee, the commander of the unit came to me and said, "We are now going into the old city from this side. Our soldiers are also going in from the other parts, and we have no flag, and we must have a flag with us. But we have no time to lose. What can you do to help us?" So I rushed upstairs, and I pulled a sheet out of the cupboard, and I happened to have a tube of blue paint, and very quickly on the kitchen table we did the Magen David in this blue paint on the sheet. Rushed downstairs, pulled a stick out of the garden to which we attached it, and they rolled it up and went down with their half-tracks and jeeps into the old city, through the border from Mount Zion. That was a great moment, and we wondered what would happen, and what would happen to that flag. Later we learned that that was the flag which they put up on the Tower of David when they conquered the city.
It seems strange that a flag of war should come from this house of peace. But is it so strange? For the first time in 20 years, the holy city is open to all. Muslims, Jews and Christians, natives and tourists meet and mingle within its walls. And Pauline Rose is a friend to everyone. A dignified old Arab said simply, "She is like a sister to me." The Jewish keeper of the shrine to his 6 million murdered brethren broke into voluble praise at the mention of her name. "She is an angel," he said again and again, "an angel." And Father Benedict opened up his church for us. It was after visiting hours, and we were apologetic, but Mr. Rose was with us. Father Benedict beamed. "For the Roses," he said, "it is never after hours."
We gave the house the name Ha-Ohel, which is the tent, the name of Abraham's tent in the wilderness, where all strangers were received with love and a welcome, and we hoped that the blessing that the people had in Abraham's tent would also come upon this house.
Evie Garrett was meeting Mrs. Pauline Rose.